Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Javli, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are so delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Robert Beatty. He is here to celebrate his brand new middle grade novel, Willa of Dark Hollow. Before we invite Robert into the studio, we want to let you know we have a brand new Reading with Your Kids certified great read, designed to shine, read aloud rhymes for any size heart, volume 2 by our friend Joy Reeser. This book is a joy, just like volume 1. Designed to shine, read aloud rhymes for any size heart, volume 2 is a beautiful book filled with wonderful read-aloud rhymes that can really inspire your kid, ignite their imagination. One of my favorites is a reminder to us to kind of chill out a little bit. It's called Hurry. Hurry yourself to slowing way down, since too much of flurry can give you a frown. You could bump into walls or stub your big toe. When fast is your pace, accidents grow. Give up your hurry, add space to your time. Let daydreams roll into 8 ways to be kind. Take a seat on the porch to slow down your way. Let breathing bring pause to this very fine day. And I just want to add to hurry yourself down to your local independent bookshop or to your favorite gigantic website to get your copy of Designed to Shine, Read Aloud Rhymes for Any Size Heart, Volume 2 by our friend Joy Reeser. It is our Reading with Your Kids certified great read. Joining us right now from Asheville in North Carolina, our guest today is the author of Willa of Dark Hollow, a great middle grade novel by our guest, Robert Beatty. Robert, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you for having me. So glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Now, as you were telling me before we started, Willa of Dark Hollow takes place in the Great Smoky Mountains.
That's right. Yeah. So it's what I call a historical fantasy, which means it has a basis in a real setting and real history, but then has mystery and magic layered on top of it.
Ooh, cool. So what time in history are we talking about?
We're talking about 1901, so it's the turn of the century. And the main character, her name's Willa. And she's this 13-year-old girl that lives deep in the forests of the Great Smoky Mountains. And it's a time when large industrial logging crews are coming in and cutting a lot of the forest, just clear cutting large areas. And it's destroying her world because she lives in the forest with her clan of people who are called the Farron. So think of sort of a indigenous tribe of people who live in the forest.
Wow. That's actually going on today down in the rainforest of Brazil.
That's exactly right. And so this story, although it's a historical story, is definitely trying to touch on the topics of today, which is to cherish and understand and protect our forests.
Yeah. Now, was that intentional that, did you pick this subject intentionally to address that, or was this an idea that you had and a story that you wanted to tell and then realize, wow, this is really relevant to what's going on today?
Well, I came up with the character first. I should say my daughters and I came up with the characters because I write for my 3 daughters and I get them to help me write my books and develop the characters and the plots. And so we came up with the character of Willa first, and she's a very unusual person, has a lot of strange and unusual powers, and then we wrap the conflict around it.
Interesting. I love that you have a little team of I don't know, of editors, but certainly motivators there at your home working with you.
Yeah, so they're what I call my built-in focus group. They make sure that I depict this girl in a accurate and fun fashion. So we come up with the ideas, we brainstorm, and then I write a chapter, and then I read it to them, and then they give me brutally honest feedback in real time. So they'll say things like, "Oh, that's really cool, Dad. Do more of that." Or, "Oh, this part's so boring. Let's just get rid of it." And so, yeah, they'll definitely give me feedback and help make the book much stronger.
I'm sure. How long did it take you to be able to grow skin thick enough that you could hear that, "Dad, this is really boring. Let's throw this stuff out"?
Yeah, so that goes to my history as a writer. So I actually started writing when I was 11 years old. I ran out of books to read in my house, and my mom said, "There's an old typewriter in the closet. Why don't you go play with that?" And those were her exact words, "Go play with that." And I got it out and plugged it in and started typing the letters chapter 1, and I just started working on my first novel. I'd like to say it was awesome, but it wasn't. It was awful. And I got some feedback from my mom, who was the only person I could convince to read it. And she gave me some good tips, and I was determined to do better. So I wrote another one and gave it to my mom and my brothers and then my friends. And over the years, I would write stories, write novels, and I would give them to people and listen to their experience of reading it. I would almost interview them and say, "How did you feel at this point? And what were you thinking at this chapter?" and so on. And I basically taught myself how to write by listening to the experiences of the people who were reading my material. And so I actually wrote for many, many years before I became a published author. And so today I continue with that process. My daughters help me. My wife helps me greatly. I also use independent professional editors to help me. And only once I think the book is perfect, based on the responses I'm getting from my reading team, then I give it to my editor at Disney, the publisher, and then she provides more feedback, and I listen to that and make refinements and revisions accordingly. Now, I want to clarify, no one can tell you how to write or what sentences to write or what plot to come up with. It's not like that. It's more like they tell me how they feel as they're listening to or reading the story. And then I determine whether I've achieved my goal in that particular part of the story and revise accordingly.
What was it that you wanted your readers to feel when you set out to create Willa of Dark Hollow?
Well, the main thing I wanted to do was to give my daughters a heroine who was this strange and unusual kind of weird girl. She's not even human, but she has this heroic heart. She has a good heart, and she wants to do good. And so she has many huge challenges in front of her that seem much larger than anything she can handle. And I wanted to show Willa in action, fighting against her enemies, hiding from her enemies, trying to decide what's right and what's wrong, dealing with difficult challenges and so on. I wanted to show that to my daughters. Now, I keep saying Willa's unusual, so let me mention some of the ways. So she is what is called a Farron. Mm-hmm. She is also a wood witch. And what that means is that she has many forest-related powers. So she doesn't have white skin or black or brown or yellow skin. Instead, her skin changes to the color of whatever is around her. So she's almost like a chameleon. And if she's hiding in the bushes, her skin will turn green and leafy. And if she's standing next to the trunk of a tree, her skin will turn brown and like craggy like bark. She also speaks an ancient Farron language that's so old that all the animals of the forest understand it instinctively. So her best friend is a wolf, and she has a friend that among the bears and the otters and the ravens and so on. She's very connected to the natural world. She has the ability to put her palms flat onto the roots of a tree or other plant and ask that tree to grow very rapidly and spontaneously in front of her. So she has all these various forest-related powers.
So neat. I am imagining that a young person reading this book, and even an adult reading this book, would just have so much fun being lost in the mountains, following Willa around.
Yeah, so one of the things I've learned over the years of writing, one of the things I've really tried to do with my style of writing is to get very close into the point of view of the main character. So I want it to feel immersive so that when someone starts reading the story, they just get pulled into it like they're living inside Willa's world, or even our Willa. And so there's a lot of techniques in the language in doing that. One of them is to always describe things and to paint pictures with words using the vocabulary and the feelings that Willa would have. So it's a very subjective point of view rather than objective. So I try not to be like an objective camera that just describes everything in black and white. Instead, it's all very closely tied to how Willa thinks and feels. So, for example, there's a scene where she's sneaking up on a log cabin where some humans live, and she doesn't say she's sneaking up on a log cabin or a house, and she doesn't say that the walls of the house are made out of wood. She says that the walls of the humans' lair were made out of the murdered carcasses of her friends. And what I mean by that her friends are the trees. Mm-hmm. She knows individual trees. So when she sees a log cabin, these are murdered carcasses laying on their sides. And so the idea is to describe everything from Willa's forest point of view.
That really is kind of mind-blowing. As you were describing, from Willa's point of view, looking at that human lair, it certainly is different than as, again, using your example, Willa snuck up on the log cabin, looking at a log cabin as, built with the carcasses of my murdered friends. It takes the story to a whole new level.
Right, yeah. So the idea is to try to get the reader, both young readers and older readers, to kind of think about things differently, to see a tree in a somewhat different way, to when they hear ravens or crows flying over, to actually remember that these are sentient creatures and that they are communicating with one another and that they have their own families and communities and language. And I've just personally always loved that idea. I love nature and birds and forests. I think they're very mysterious and beautiful. And so I just want to inspire a little bit of that in the imagination of my readers.
Yeah. How did you learn to write in that fashion?
Mostly just practice, trial and error. And there was a point in my writing career where I had a major breakthrough, and that was that prior to this point, I used to write very descriptively. I actually have a degree in engineering and have a background in technology and software programming and things like that. So in many ways, I'm a very objective person. And so prior to this point in my writing career, I would write in a very objective fashion, again, like I was a camera. And so when I'd have a character walk into a room, I would say it was a huge banquet hall, and it was 100 feet long, and it was 50 feet high, and it was very descriptive and detailed and maybe even well written. But there was a point when I learned that wasn't a very good or imaginative way to write the story. So instead, when the girl walks into this giant room, she would say the ceiling was so high that a hawk could soar through it. So imagine, instead of saying it's 50 feet high, she says that a hawk could fly through the room. Very different way to depict and envision the story. And this breakthrough actually came with discussions with my wife and I had written my original first published breakthrough novel, which was Seraphine and the Black Cloak. I had gotten an agent for it, and for the first time in my life, and it was sent out to all the publishers, and they all rejected it. And my agent said, well, sorry, this isn't going to work. And I said, well, why did they reject it? Send me their rejection letters. And he said, well, no, I probably shouldn't do that. It's pretty harsh. And I said, no, you don't understand. Send me those rejection letters. And they did. And I could tell based on what the publishers said about the first version what was wrong. And that is, they thought I was a good writer. They thought it was a good story, good setting, good concept, but they just weren't feeling the character. And the reason is because I had written it so objectively. And so my wife and I kind of had this eureka moment where we realized that I was writing too black and white, almost too much like an engineer, and I needed to get into the mind of this little girl and all of her perspective. And so I rewrote the whole novel, sent it back to my agent, and then it was acquired by Disney to be published.
You know, we talk a lot about the value of reading with our kids, and certainly one of the things we talk about is that books can be a wonderful window into somebody else's world, allowing kids to see what another person's life is like. As you're speaking about developing this writing style of writing from the character's perspective, I'm thinking what a wonderful kind of exercise it can be for a family to sit down and take the example that they're learning and experiencing by reading Willa of Dark Hollow, and helping kids to kind of think and put themselves not only in the shoes of somebody else, but put themselves into the mind and see the world through another's eyes, to help get a better understanding of the lives that other people are living.
Yes, I totally agree. I have always felt very strongly and wondered about this idea is, where do we get our morals? Where do we get our feelings of what's right and what's wrong and how to treat our fellow human beings? And of course, we get much of that from watching our parents and our brothers and sisters and the people around us. But that's really the most important foundation for morals and human behavior that we have. But if I think back to my young life and even my adult life, I also know that I develop a lot of my morals and make a lot of my decisions about the kind of person I'm going to be by watching and listening to and reading stories. So when you read a story and there's a hero in that story and they're doing great things and they're making difficult but the correct decisions and you're rooting for them, you're actually forming your own views, your own morals in your head. And that's so important for young people to have these people that they look up to and that they can see this person is good and they're doing the right thing, even though it's a difficult challenge. And these folks over here are doing the wrong thing, and that's not how I want to be. We see it in the movies we watch, the stories we read, the stories we listen to. So we have all these examples of human interaction, and they all teach us how to be better people, or in some cases, how to be worse people.
Yeah.
So I agree with you entirely.
Yeah. Fascinating. What is it like working with Disney? I mean, you hear that name. My son and my daughter-in-law are huge Disney fans. Everything Disney. They just got back from Disney World 2 days ago. What's it like being part of this enormous? I was going to use the word family, but it's even bigger than that. It's just this, this enormous movement in the world.
Well, the first thing I would say, it's fun and exciting, and it's an honor to work with them. But one of the things that really hits me every time I work with them and write stories for them is that they really, really care about the things we're talking about. So they want to tell really good stories and show really good examples of human behavior and morals, and they really deeply care about their effect on the world and the stories that they tell. So when when I come up with a story idea and I talk to my editors at Disney about it, we always talk about the implications of that story, and not just whether it would be a fun story or an entertaining story, but whether it's the right story, that the messages in the story are good. And so here's an example. My stories take place in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and in this area in North Carolina and in Tennessee, the Cherokee people live here now, and they lived here at the turn of the century when my stories take place. And so from the very beginning, I wanted to depict Cherokee people and wanted to depict them in a way that was respectful and honored their traditions and showed them doing good and powerful things. And the folks at Disney were extremely sensitive to this idea that, okay, if we're going to show Cherokee, we need to be very careful here and do it properly, do it correctly. And so my Cherokee characters, there are Cherokee characters in both my Willa books as well as my Serafina books, but they are, real live human beings, and they're depicted as strong characters with their own individual identities. And we try to get the characters very accurate. We try to get the themes of the story very consistent with the Cherokee beliefs. And then we actually go further with it. So I have colleagues that are Cherokee, and I send it to them. Some of them work in the Cherokee Museum. Others are educators at the Cherokee schools. And I ask them to provide me feedback and say, okay, is there anything I'm doing here that isn't respectful to the Cherokee or doesn't honor Cherokee traditions or is inaccurate? Let's revise it. Let's change it if that's the case. And so Disney's very focused on telling good stories.
I think that's so important to take that responsible view especially today, but it should be in every aspect of our lives.
Yes, I agree entirely. So, for example, another example is now we're working on a story, a future book where the main character is actually a foster child and has foster parents, and we want to handle that situation very carefully and in a way that will empower and inspire both foster parents and foster kids.
Oh, I am excited about that. We've spoken a lot about the foster care system here on the podcast. Had some wonderful experts in the field. Dr. John DeGarmo is one that comes to mind, and we recently interviewed Steve Pemberton, who grew up in the foster care system in Massachusetts and rose up to where he is now as a very successful executive with some Fortune 500 companies. So I'm excited about that book. You seem to have a real deep love for the part of the world that you're in, the Great Smoky Mountains, and the turn of the century. Having gone through and traveled through North Carolina, I understand that the love of the land, it's a beautiful part of the country. What is it about the turn of the century that is so attractive to you?
Well, what I find the most interesting about this time period was that there was a shift in what was happening. So technology was changing and people's view and behavior was changing. So there's just a lot happening at this time period. So in the Willa book, Willa of Dark Hollow, it's a time when the forests are pristine, the trees are huge and ancient, it's old growth forest, and the mountains are relatively untouched. There are European settlers living there, and the Cherokee are there, and there's little towns, but generally it's in some ways a pioneering wilderness still. But at the same time, you have these industrial loggers coming in with their steam-powered cutting machines and their locomotives, and this location is just about to change in a huge way. It's also at a key moment where people of this area were just beginning to realize that their world was in danger and that they needed to figure out a way to protect it. So it was the very first moments when people started thinking about creating a national park to protect forever the world that they lived in. But then this was complicated by the fact that in order to protect it as a national park, they would actually have to move out of it because no people can live in a national park. So in 1901, there was a lot on everybody's mind about logging and forests and homesteading and about the arrival of a national park.
Wow. So much to think. You mentioned to me before the interview began that you were finding that there were a lot of adults reading this middle grade novel. I think that this would be a fabulous novel for a family to co-read together and then speak about, talk about over the dinner table on the way to school or ballet class or soccer class. Just so much to talk about, and I even think that this would be a beautiful book for families to take turns reading aloud to each other. The way that you write, getting into the minds of the characters would be a lot of fun for families to kind of play with as they were reciting it.
Yeah, so there are a lot of families doing exactly that. So a lot of families are reading it aloud. I would say the most common dynamic is perhaps a 10 or 11 or 12-year-old girl reading it with her grandmother. The grandmother and granddaughter will read it together, and it will bond them and pull them together. One of the main characters in both Willa books is Willa's grandmother. You'll see a lot of times when a son and a mother are reading it together, or brothers and sisters, and so it's definitely multi-generational, which I find very pleasing. It's designed for that purpose. It's very much about family and multiple generations and the link between those generations. And then the other thing that's happening is I'm finding a lot of adult readers. So, like, for example, a couple that's 75 years old, and they will take turns reading the chapters to each other. And so it's just a nice way for people to bond together and have a shared experience.
Yeah. Well, I know people, you're speaking about links between people and generations. People are going to want to know what link they can use to find out more about you and find out more about Willa of Dark Hollow.
Yeah, so I have a website. It's Robert Beatty Books, and that's Beatty. So robertbeattybooks.com is the website, but the book is also available wherever books are sold. So that's Barnes & Noble and Amazon and independent bookstores. It's available everywhere. It came out just last week, so it's a brand new book, and you don't have to read any of my previous books. You can just start right with Willa of Dark Hollow.
Yeah. And we love supporting indie and small bookstores. So if you are interested in picking up the book and you want to support them, also pick up the phone, ask them if they have it. If they don't have it on their shelves, now they'll be able to get it there in just a couple of days. And what a great way to support your local bookstores. We've had a great time speaking to the author of Willa of Dark Hollow, a great middle grade novel from the folks at Disney. And the author has been our guest, Robert Beatty. Hey, Robert, thanks so much for being on the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and really enjoyed it.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It's going to be a special Protecting the Planet with Your Kids episode of the show. Our guest will be Patricia Newman. She'll be here to celebrate Planet Ocean. You heard at the top of the show that we announced that Joy Reeser's Designed to Shine Read Aloud Rhymes for Any Size Heart, Volume 2 is our latest Reading with Your Kids certified great read. We're so proud of Joy. She's been a great friend to the show. We're really delighted that Volume 1 of Designed to Shine is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read, and we're really excited that she submitted Volume 2 for this wonderful award. It lets us know that Joy and so many other authors find great value in our Certified Great Read program, and that's why we established it. We created the program to help authors, to create a program to help authors' books stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, please take a minute to check out our Certified Great Read program. You can find out all about it at our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll on down to Certified Great Reads. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Robert Beatty. Be sure to check out Willa of Dark Hollow. Also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan, Justina Thompson, Helen Fraser. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.